So it's been a little while since I've been on posting some content, and I mentioned in the community section that I hit my head just recently on a branch. That branch just to the left of me, you can't see it. It's rather large. It's like the size of a tree trunk in some ways. This tree behind me is very old, and it's got a very large trunk. Anyway, I just had a slight concussion, and they did a CT head scan, and yes, I have a brain. And so everything seems to be okay as far as I know. I'll hear more from the doctor on Monday. But anyway, or Monday or Tuesday, I'll give them a ring and see if there's anything else. But I don't expect there'll be anything problematic there. Anyway, so I haven't been. I've also been very busy, and it's starting to be spring, so I'm probably not going to be posting as much in the next 2 months, probably, because we have a lot to do around the garden because it's spring and there's a lot of attending to weeding and trees, fruit trees, and all of that. You probably know that if you've got a garden of your own. And so anyway, I will be doing my best to sort of do some posting, but I don't expect that it'll be as much as normal. So anyway, so I've been sort of watching the comings and goings on social media, the sort of argy-bargy that seems to be happening on the left. And I use this phrase often, and I put the left sometimes in quotes because some people I'm not so sure of these days, but I consider this sort of like a bit like crabs in a barrel in some ways. It's a terrible image of crabs, and I'm vegan, by the way, so I find that very disturbing image of crabs trying to get out of a barrel, and they're all getting on top of one another and trying to climb out, and of course it's hopeless. And I'm not saying that the cause of the left is hopeless, but I think that we have some real problems now with people who are, I'm guessing this is all speculation, but I think that we have, there are certain people who may have realized that it's more profitable to occasionally put out sort of like kind of right-wing talking points. And I've noticed that with the major sort of journalists on the left who say they're on the left are starting to put out sort of right-wing talking points. If you've been paying attention to sort of Max Blumenthal and Glenn Greenwald in the last sort of year or so, but Max Blumenthal in the last probably 6 months, there's some odd things happening there. And you know that I only talk very highly of Max Blumenthal's journalism, I think, and he's an incredible author. He's a great journalist, but I'm somewhat concerned with some of the things, the directions he's taking. And I'm not talking about, I think it's important that people talk about it's very windy here at the moment, so I'm using this little microphone. It's very important that people talk about the problems of the vaccine passport and also vaccine mandates. I've said in another video about 2 weeks ago that I think that incentives for people to get vaccines is much better than, sort of threatening them with, threatening to fire them and all that kind of stuff. And also vaccine passports are going to be used to cripple people, basically keep them away from coming into the country or, going to certain venues. It's another way it can be used to suppress, sort of people that are already poor, black people, people of color, asylum seekers, refugees, and so forth. So I am against that, and I'm for incentives to encourage people for vaccine. I'm not anti-vaccine. I'm for safe vaccines, and I think that, and I'll just put out one fact here, that vaccines stop people from ending up in ICU and stop people from dying in ICU. That is a fact that a lot of people who are anti-vax, which I know Max Blumenthal says he's not anti-vax, but he is anti-vax. He'll say he's not anti-vax and then proceed to use the most non-scientific things and interview people that are totally not medical in any way to try and make points. He'll cherry pick different things to make out as if, and try and undermine the whole thing, which I find very problematic, particularly when black people in particular have already got good reason to fear any sort of vaccines or anything like that, or because they've been tested on unknowingly by the state. They've been given syphilis and all sorts of things by the state, and so they have a good, real reason to fear people pushing any sort of medications on them or medical interventions. So it sort of just undermines that. So I mentioned that in the other video that I did, and so I'm not going to rehash that. But I just find that the direction Max Blumenthal is going with that, and I think he's going to interview somebody else tomorrow on his Behind the Firewall foreign agents podcast that he has on Rockfin. He's sort of, I think he's going to really go for that. And to be honest, if you want to make money on social media, all you have to do is start leaning to the right, and people start throwing money at you. And I think there is a certain amount, there's probably, and this is all speculation, but I think there's a certain amount of dark money from corporations and really far right writers to kind of feed, to feed the this sort of inclination to put out, right-wing talking points, because it's a lot more profitable to be a right-winger and to be a far-righter than it is to be on the left. And I think that, this awful system of capitalism is basically, I don't blame people for, particularly in the US, where there is very little social support. The government has abandoned the people pretty much. They've embraced corporations and social security, social support for corporations and the 1%ers and the billionaires or whatever, but the rest is rugged individualism, as Martin Luther King said. So I don't blame people on the left in some ways for having an inclination to sort of like embrace different figures, but at the same time, I can see why, because it's so difficult, particularly if you're making a living from doing a podcast, and you've decided you're going to do a podcast and you rely on donations. And it's not enough sometimes when people on the left during COVID don't have much to throw at you, and so you start grifting. I don't excuse that, but I also understand it, right? Then there are people who are just probably greedy and can see that you can make a packet. You can make a packet from avoiding anything that is controversial, meaning anything where you might speak your mind out about something that is going to be suppressed. And I'm not talking about COVID now, I'm talking about other issues, and anti-imperialism is one of them. You can avoid those different things. There are some social media influencers, YouTube influencers that earlier in their podcasts, they would be talking about all sorts of controversial things and talking about being socialist as well, and addressing capitalism, criticizing capitalism, all that kind of stuff. And now they're right in the middle, and almost a little bit grifty to the right even. They're in the middle and they don't mention that anymore, and they're doing fine, thank you very much, really, really well off. It's sad. It's sad to me that this is what capitalism brings out in people, and also the way there is no social support in the US really, and people sort of will think of all kinds of ways and do all kinds of things and say controversial things and say wacko things so that they'll get people to pay attention to them, so that people will start throwing money at them. And then there's, people going on Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson is a white nationalist who is an extreme bigot, who has said awful things about women, really, really misogynist things about anti-feminist stuff. He's said incredibly racist stuff and continues to do that. He's constantly warmongering against China. He's a imperialist white nationalist. That's what he is. And every so often he'll get somebody from the left on, or who say they're from the left, and that person will talk about imperialism or talk about Julian Assange, and then then he'll go back to his regular programming, which is bashing the left and culture wars and bashing trans people and all that kind of thing. And I don't really understand. I wonder if the people, the high-profile people who go on that show, who say they're from the left, why do they ever think to themselves, I wonder why Tucker Carlson invites me onto this show to talk about Julian Assange, as if Tucker Carlson doesn't have the intelligence to work out that it was why Julian Assange is, as a political prisoner, why he's being persecuted, constantly tortured, and will probably ending up in the US, or he'll kill himself first, or they'll kill him through some other method, hoping that he'll get COVID or whatever. But why does Tucker Carlson doesn't need a comedian to tell him about Julian Assange, even if that comedian is a really very intelligent and very well spoken comedian, and does good points about imperialism and also and Assange and all of that. But does Tucker Carlson need somebody of that high profile telling him what's wrong with the whole Julian Assange thing? Because apparently he said, oh, it wasn't until Jimmy Dore spoke to me, talked about this, that I really understood what this was about. Really? I mean, how silly do we have to be to believe that he doesn't already understand this? So he's grifting from the left, Tucker Carlson. And I'm sorry to say this, but there are people going on that show, and they get a glow of new subscribers, probably, or if they're talking, they get a glow of new subscribers from Tucker Carlson. It's a symbiotic relationship. And the thing about this is, and you might say, well, that's great, that he gets to speak, that people on the left who say they're on the left get to speak at, on Fox News, and they get to see this different audience and get them. And yes, there might be some people that think, oh, I didn't think of it that way before. But there are a lot of, far right people who couldn't care less about the left. They couldn't care less, and if Donald Trump was saying Julian Assange needs to be executed, they would be clapping their hands about that. If that happened in 2024, when he's on his new campaign run, or if Biden says Julian Assange needs to be released, they would be all against that. If Tucker Carlson suddenly says Assange needs to be released, then suddenly they're all for it. People shift like the wind, depending on who. It's a bit like Joe Rogan. Depending on who Joe Rogan is in front of them, their opinions change. Some people may not, other people yes. But we must ask ourselves, why is Tucker Carlson getting people like Glenn Greenwald on, getting people like Jimmy Dore on, people that have a lot of followers, who have probably in some ways, like Glenn Greenwald, a lot of people worldwide who follow him. And he's doing fine, thank you very much. I think he's doing very, very well, probably multi-millionaire at this point. Why would he be wanting them to come on when he understands this himself? And also, he spends all the rest of his time warmongering against China and, chucking off at the left and mocking them. And why doesn't Glenn Greenwald have Tucker Carlson on his show and then ask him about all these positions, these awful imperialist positions he has, these right-wing CIA talking points about China and all of that, and why he throws off at black people and women and all of that? Why doesn't Glenn Greenwald have Tucker Carlson on? Why doesn't Jimmy Dore have Tucker Carlson on? Because they wouldn't bother. They would know that if they have him on, he's going to say all this awful stuff, and that interferes with the fact that they're going on his show, and he's asking them questions specifically about something, and they get people sort of watching them there and hopefully subscribing to their channel. There's nothing wrong, though, with having people subscribe to your channel, and maybe you're hoping that they will change their mind and move away from Fox News. Who knows? But I think because Tucker Carlson is such a nationalist, such a white supremacist nationalist who's an imperialist, why are they choosing him, and why is he choosing them? Now, I want to move on to something I saw on Twitter, and I haven't been paying attention much to, and these are all questions, okay? I'm not really casting aspersions on Jimmy Dore particularly. Or even Glenn Greenwald in that way. I don't really know what's in their own mind or in their hearts. I just sort of really find this sort of meshing of this thing that the Rising with Sagar and Jetty and crystal ball, this idea that the right and the left can mesh together, and because we're against the oligarchy. I've said this before, but the far right and right-wingers don't care a toss about the left. They would be more than happy to see the end of the censorship of the left entirely, and they are constantly attacking minority groups and protected groups, and they don't know if they're anti-imperialist or imperialist most of the time, but most of the time they're American exceptionalists, which means they're imperialist, and they, depending on, they're okay with Tucker Carlson going on about China, and that's looking very much like it's going to end up in a war and could end us, basically. And he could run for president. That's the other thing that I'm going to get to the whole meshing of the right and the left in a minute. But Tucker Carlson is going to run for president one day, and that's another way of him bringing in the left by going through conduits like Glenn Greenwald and Jimmy Dore and people that have high profiles. Because one day he wants to get as much airing between the left and the right and look as if he is an anti-imperialist at the same time as pushing CIA talking points, or that he's for Julian Assange, but at the same time he's totally cool with he's totally cool with corporations running the show. He's a capitalist through and through, and he mocks socialists all the time. I don't know why anybody wants to give somebody that is basically grifting to the left, why they want to give them any chance to get a foot in. And that's what Sayer Angetti is doing on The Rising, which is now Breaking Points. He's trying to make this case that the right and the left have a lot in common. There are a few things that the right and the left have in common, but there is a lot that they have totally different goals at the end. The right doesn't care a toss about the left and would rather probably round them up and put them in camps. This is the far right. And the left, the real left, wants everything good for everybody, including those that hate us. That's what the real left is. It's working for everybody so that everybody is eventually free from empire and free from capitalism, end-stage capitalism, which is inextricably linked with imperialism, and fascism is capitalism in decay. The left wants something good for everyone. The far right and the right do not. So what are we doing there then? And capitalism makes people end up doing things that they probably would have not done, like many years ago. As it gets more and more restrictive and more oppressive, and as the US becomes a failed state, people do more and more sort of grifty things, more and more things that, trying to find anything to make money, and that's a dreadful thing. It's sort of basically, it ends up in a kind of a spiritual death. And I don't know how far this is going to go. I don't know how far this is going to go, before it gets to this. But it really is like watching crabs in a barrel. It really is. And I'm very saddened with the direction that Max Blumenthal appears to be taking. And I also have noticed, and I'm sorry to say this, but I've also noticed that it appears like the grey zone. And I'm not talking about Ben Norton here, but Max Blumenthal seems to have had a falling out with the Empire Files, with Abby Martin and Mike Preisner, because Max Blumenthal never mentioned when this groundbreaking, world important case where Abby Martin had a victory over the Zionists who were trying to basically make it you couldn't get a job at university if you didn't pledge allegiance to the apartheid state of Israel. She won a huge court case against a Georgia university who tried to get her to sign this pledge, and then they wouldn't let her speak at this media, I think it was a media conference. She wasn't even going to talk about Palestine. Well, so that was a huge case, and the Grey Zone completely ignored it. Then they completely ignored Earth's Greatest Enemy, which is the documentary that Abby Martin and Mike Preisner through the Empire Files are currently filming. That is a very important documentary about the military-industrial complex and the devastation it is causing, not only, to people, but to the environment, to other animals, and all of that. It's a really important documentary that a lot of people who aren't in the know will get a real shock when they find out the lengths to which the military-industrial complex is one of the greatest. Putting aside that animal agriculture, and I've talked about this before, is a massive devastation, and we can change that by being vegan, because that ends demand for animal products and ends demand for the destruction of the rainforest, Amazon rainforest, and sixth-mass extinction, and all of that. Read that Dr. Paul's largest study to date about that, which I'll just put a little meme up that I often post. But the Earth's Greatest Enemy and Seaspiracy is another one, Cowspiracy, all good documentaries, and the Earth's Greatest Enemy will probably be finished in a year. They have $50,000 now. They need at least another $50,000, so check out their GoFundMe and please donate to that. But Max Blumenthal, you can tell there's a problem between Max Blumenthal, and I don't know what it is, okay, and in some ways I don't care, but I find that the fact that he's not mentioning this, or nobody on the Grey Zone is mentioning these important things that Abby Martin is doing, who's an amazing leftist independent journalist. I find that really sad. That's what I mean, crabs in a barrel. I don't know what's going on. Everything seems to be kind of really falling apart. And I don't know why. I don't know why, and I don't really care. I can't deal with it, really. I can't deal with whatever the internal fights that people have and whatever. But I do know that no matter what falling out, Max Blumenthal or whatever, why he doesn't like whatever Empire Files is doing, or Abby Martin or Mike Preisner, or whatever it is, he should not have ignored that important court case that Abby Martin had a victory in. That is just bad journalism. Bad to ignore that. He should have put away his personal feelings and reported on that. And that's what I mean by there's weird things happening. And fortunately, I'm happy to say that Empire Files goes on unabated. They don't pay attention to all the argy-bargy stuff. They don't really get into any of that. And they do this amazing work. And I really admire that in Abby Martin and Mike Preisner and people like that. They just keep out of all the he said that and he said that about this person and that person. What do I think about that? Who thinks what about that? That kind of thing. To some degree, critique of people, journalists or whatever, or situations that involve certain personalities. If they've said something that's wackadoo, critique is okay. But then when it gets into they said this about it, what did that person say about this person when they said this, and that kind of thing, that starts to get a little bit nuts, like the whole Cenk Uygur thing and the TYT and all of that. Now I'm going to do something that probably seems like this, but I hope that it doesn't, or I'm doing something that seems like this, and hopefully it isn't. But I saw the Glenn Greenwald interchange, just the basics of it. Glenn Greenwald and Chelsea Manning. Chelsea Manning said on Twitter just recently, and this sort of seems like it's just come out of the blue, but it's probably, I would guess, for her to make a statement like this. Chelsea Manning, by the way, in case you don't know, is a very courageous whistleblower who went to prison for 7 years, spent a lot of that in solitary confinement, was tortured, was left naked, was woken up every 5 minutes. She basically was tortured in that prison, and she spent 7 years for releasing information to Julian Assange via WikiLeaks about the war crimes of empire. Collateral Murder is the video that you can see if you're lucky online. YouTube suppresses that. That and many thousands and thousands of documents about the corruption of empire and also of various politicians and so forth. And so they punished her, putting her in prison for 7 years. She was supposed to be in there for 35. Obama released her. She was suicidal in prison, and I think he probably thought we didn't want to make a martyr out of her and have her suicide in prison, and that's why he released her. And then she was put back in prison because she wouldn't roll over on Julian Assange. And this is what makes the next thing so sort of sad. I know that she said something recently that she wished that she had released. She wished she had released those files to Ken Klipperstein instead of Julian Assange. And people go, oh, that's an awful thing to say. And Erin Mate said that's an awful thing to say. Well, yes, maybe that's an unfortunate thing to say. I don't know why she said that, but I'm going to talk about that in a second. That's not what I'm going to bring up right now. She said something about Glenn Greenwald on Twitter, and usually when people start breaking out like this, it's usually a culmination of many things over a period of time. And then, and then in this case, I think that's what it probably is. And so she said, Glenn Greenwald, I don't have $10,000 right now, but if I get it, I want to send it back to you from a donation you once did. I can't deal with this anymore. I'm terrified of you and everything you do. You're greedy, unprincipled, and I'm embarrassed for ever considering you a friend. So that's a fairly strong statement, and it's also sort of basically making a statement about someone who she wants to separate herself. She wants to separate herself from Glenn Greenwald, and I don't know if they've been talking even since 2018. I don't know, but anyway. So I don't know exactly what she's talking about, and I don't think anybody else really knows what she's talking about. People are making a lot of assumptions. But one assumption they don't seem to make is that Glenn Greenwald has been doing more and more transphobic stuff. Now, this is probably one part of it. You know, I know, like, Chelsea Manning is a trans woman. She had to transition during her time in solitary confinement, and it was, I can't even imagine that. And she's had a lot of hate, a lot of transphobia, and Glenn Greenwald is one of those people. Now, he's not directing it at Chelsea Manning, but he may as well be, because he's actually said a number of things which we've talked about on this channel. And you can look up his name, and you can look up, there's a live stream, and there's also a couple of videos about it. And the first time he did it, that was sort of really unfortunate, and and I was thinking, what the hell? And then he started defending a transphobic TERF. TERF, basically, I won't call people radical feminists, trans-exclusive radical feminists. They're just transphobic women. Sriya was this author's name, and she wrote this awful, hideous book about a transphobic book about trans people, which is full of nonsense. And he was basically talking about how awful it was that her book was censored by certain publications. And he could have picked any other book in the world to talk about that. No, he talked about that. Then he's been on Joe Rogan, and he's said some questionable things. He's also tried to make out like the comedian Erin Mohr, M-O-H-R, that she wasn't joking when she said, I write down the names of people who misgender me and I use it later. She was joking, and he made out as if she was being serious, and he never retracted that. He presented her in a video when he was talking about, sort of fuck things that people do. I can't remember the exact what the video was about originally, but basically he pulled out this video of a trans comedian saying that and pretending as if it wasn't a joke. That kind of thing. He's done numerous things, and he's also he's put out this ridiculous notion that trans men are trying to, recognizing trans men or something is going to erase lesbians. I mean, honestly and truly, he's grasping for straws. And so it just keeps going along like that. This is Glenn Greenwald. He's done at least 5 things I know of that show that he's a transphobe. And he will say, I'm not a transphobe, not at all. That's rubbish. But I'm sorry. When you keep doing that kind of thing, that's what you are. So I would imagine that would be one thing, and that's something that different commentators, leftist commentators, seem to miss, because trans people are something that a lot of leftists seem to, at best, keep silent about, and at worst, kind of, when they can, have a little joke about something. But at best, most people will just be quiet. And if they have a problem with something, they won't get on somebody who is a trans person to talk about it. No, they will get on someone who is, sort of a transphobe to talk about it. I'm not saying that this is happening necessarily all on the left, but I find there's a silence about trans issues, and there is no interviewing of trans people. And, I've noticed that a lot of leftists ignore Glenn Greenwald's transphobia, and one has to ask the question, why? If Glenn Greenwald was a big, full-on racist, would we ignore that? And why do we ignore when somebody is being transphobic repeatedly, and that causes violence? There are trans people being murdered all over the world, particularly in Brazil, by the way. And along with women, there's femicide happening all the time in Brazil. Why is Glenn Greenwald being transphobic like this? That's not a leftist thing to do. Why is Glenn Greenwald making stupid arguments that are completely non-scientific about COVID? About saying that, well, if we allow people to drive cars and we know that cars kill people, there's a cost benefit there that, that we drive cars even though we know cars kill people. Why don't we just let COVID go everywhere? And, because that's the same thing, There's a benefit to opening up, and who cares if people die? What kind of I'm sorry, but not only is that a fucking stupid argument, because cars don't spread death like COVID is like something that you can spread around the place. Does he complain that smoking is verboten in a lot of areas now? Basically, people who smoke are pariahs almost. They get pushed out into into the street, when they're at their workplace and all of this. Does he complain about the laws that are preventing people from, having secondhand smoke cancer effects and all of that? And yet he's okay that he wants, and this is another thing Max Blumenthal is promoting. He's literally said he hasn't literally said, but he's pretty much said, Max Blumenthal, that he doesn't care that a whole bunch of old people die. And by the way, there's a lot of young people now in ICU. And I wonder sometimes if these people, because they haven't been personally affected, because somebody in their family hasn't died of it, because maybe they caught it briefly and then they managed to get through it, and so they're not afraid of it, and therefore they sort of think, open up because I'm not going to die, or nobody in my family has died, so let's just open up and have people die. Over 4.5 million people have died so far. The whole herd immunity that Max Blumenthal is pushing didn't seem to work very well for that 4.5 million, and there's probably a lot more that are not accounted for in various countries. And now there's a Delta variant that is even more contagious than the Delta variant Z or something like that. Wait until that hits the streets and everywhere. It's already hit the streets, but wait until that spreads. The death toll is going to climb. Wait until we see the results of those massive football crowds in the United States just recently. Insane amounts of people. I wait until, I feel like there's a certain amount of selfishness here when Glenn Greenwald and Max Blumenthal are pushing for everything to open up, and who cares, just let people die and let's see how it all pans out, right? That they haven't had anybody particularly die in their own family, their parents or their child, or Max Blumenthal, his wife, his partner, and whatever, right? They haven't been on death's door themselves. Or they've maybe, like I said, they've had it, they got through it, and now they feel like they're invincible. But I find it, I don't find that sort of leftist kind of behavior at all. I don't. When you can sort of write off a group, like Blumenthal has written off old people, and he doesn't care. When you write off a group, you can write off other groups when they become inconvenient as well. You can. That's what happens. It's a slow drift where, other groups become an inconvenience to your lifestyle. I can't get to go to my favorite restaurant. I can't, sort of go overseas right now. I'm in lockdown or whatever. Yeah, I get that the lockdowns are awful, but if it had been done properly in the beginning, if it had been done properly in the beginning in the United States, it probably would have been much better off, and there would have been far less variants, because when you have so many people getting infected, that's what viruses do. Viruses find a way of mutating. It's not through vaccines like Max Blumenthal keeps putting out. Vaccines don't cause mutations. Viruses naturally mutate because that is the way they survive. And if you have more and more people who are getting COVID who aren't vaccinated, then you're going to find that there's going to be mutations, more and more mutations, and it's just going to keep happening. If it had been done properly in the first place, if we didn't have these capitalist systems where where governments are more interested in the economy than people, it wouldn't be like it is right now. It's capitalism. And right now here in Australia, Scott Morrison, who didn't order enough vaccines, who, if left to his own devices, we would have COVID everywhere right from the start. He's actually saying it's the states that actually saved the situation, although it's crazy now in New South Wales. But we would have a lot more deaths here if it had been left to the neocon authoritarian wannabe Scott Morrison, and now he's pushing for everything to open up, even though there's not enough people vaccinated here. That is what capitalism and what these awful neoconservative authoritarian wannabes and neoliberal authoritarian wannabes, this is what happens. I know I'm going all over the place here, but I'll get back to Chelsea Manning. She's been tortured in prison. She has obviously has an emotionally, psychologically, sort of fragile state since that, because you couldn't not be in that situation. Solitary confinement has breeds that kind of thing, and if you ever get over it, you're always probably dealing with it, a PTSD type thing, right? So if Chelsea Manning says things that are maybe a bit off base, a bit off center, or maybe they're not the most well thought out thing, how about cutting her a break? And how about people on the left stop sort of dragging her through the mud just because Glenn Greenwald had his nose put out of joint because Chelsea Manning doesn't like his direction. And there are other things that are problematic about Glenn Greenwald, and you can find that out. Just talk to Robbie Martin from Media Roots Radio. Ask him what he thinks about the various things that Glenn Greenwald's been doing over the last couple of years. It's sort of I think Glenn Greenwald knows better than to write an article. He wrote an article basically showing all the direct messages, the private messages between him and Chelsea Manning since 2016. What on earth? Really and truly. Is that what you want to do to someone who's been through what she's been through? You haven't been through that. She's been through that. She's got struggles. She has struggles.
So when I first heard I was getting out of prison, I thought, I'm going to go home, I'm going to rest, relax, almost retire. That was kind of what I was imagining, was a bit of a retirement, riding off into the sunset, end of the story. But whenever I got outside and I started to see what's changed, I really started to realize that many of the things that drove me, into activism in the first place, into doing things a decade ago, have really intensified. It's like somebody hit the gas pedal in the last few years, and many of the things that I feared would happen have largely happened with the rise of authoritarianism, the rise of the military, intelligence, and police state that we now live in, and the sort of rise of nationalism that's much more intense and hateful. When I first encountered what it was to be in a foreign country and and being an occupying force in a foreign country, and to see the complexities of war, and to really there was no way I could have known beforehand except seeing it all. And I really want people to know and understand that and see what we were seeing. And I think that was, above all else, a driver.
She was fighting suicidal ideation all the time in prison and probably after prison. And they could throw her back in prison anytime they want to, because although I think they've made enough of an example of her that no one thinks about being a whistleblower again. She's a hero, and she refused to roll over on Julian Assange, and that's why they put her back in prison. And then they charged her on top of that $400,000 or more. Fortunately, people threw in cash, and she didn't have to pay that back herself. But they could do that anytime they want to with her. So she has to live with that. And why Glenn Greenwald would then write an article showing all of the direct messages between him and her since 2016. What a baby. Why couldn't he just say to himself, okay, I'm going to contact her privately and we'll talk about it? But he probably knows why she thinks that, because I think she's probably had more conversations with him, or he probably knows why she thinks that. But I think that about him, and I'm not Chelsea Manning. I'm not terrified of him, like she says, but I feel like he's gone in a very weird direction, and he's grifting to the right now. And he's also a transphobe. Well, if you were a trans person, wouldn't you have a problem with somebody continually putting out transphobic stuff? Of course. Nobody seems to get that. I don't know why people seem to think that they don't think to themselves when they see that interaction with him and her on Twitter. Why don't they think to themselves, what really is her problem there? Part of it is because he is promoting transphobia, and she is a trans person, and there is a lot of ignorance about trans issues on the left, and at best, like I've said, people are silent. Thank goodness for people like Abby Martin, who did a Empire Files thing on trans rights. She understands the importance of trans rights. Trans rights are human rights. Luna Oi, the Vietnamese communist on YouTube, she understands the importance of trans rights. Trans rights are human rights. She understands that. What does it take for people on the left to stop putting their head in the and raising up people who are transphobes and pretending like they're not transphobic or not saying anything themselves? When are people going to get a grip on this issue? Because people are dying. Trans people are dying. Trans people are being, things are being rolled back so that they cannot transition. And there is so much ignorance about transitioning, so much ignorance. So why don't leftists who call themselves leftists, start interviewing trans people? Like trans people, not TERFs, right? Not TERFs, and I won't call them TERFs, I won't dignify them with that. They're not radical feminists, trans-exclusive radical feminists. They're just transphobes. Silly little, weak-willed, cowardly people who don't understand the issue and seem to think that there's some sort of trans agenda that's going to take over the world. Oh my God. This reminds me of the whole gay agenda thing. By the way, I had to put up with that. This whole gay agenda thing. I even had to, in Australia a few years ago, participate in a survey asking, do you think it's okay for gay people to marry? I had to participate in that. And there's the Christian fascists here in Australia, the Christian lobby, who are pushing the culture wars thing for all they're worth, and they're trying to, roll back time to basically a handmaiden's tale, and where homosexuals and, the LGBT community can just be thrown in prison or worse. This is what they're trying to do here, the Christian fascists here. Glenn Greenwald is helping the Christian fascists, basically, with that kind of crap. Anybody who isn't doing something to highlight trans issues and educate themselves on trans issues may as well join the fucking Christian fascists. Because there needs to be a real push to get that education happening and stop all this stupid ignorance and fear and these bullshit things about people going to prison if they misgender people. That has not happened, and it's bullshit. And I know all about this because I've been involved in pushing for trans kids' rights in Parliament, a couple of years ago. I'm not a trans person. I'm an ally of trans people, but I was involved in that particular campaign. My partner wrote the legislation for it. Part of the legislation, a major part of it, and there were other people who were involved in that, and it went through. It wasn't what we wanted entirely, but it was better than what it had been. So, and this is Tasmania. I mean, we wouldn't call us the bastion of progressiveness here, but certainly in that regard, So anyway, I'm all over the place here, but I use this opportunity to put this out about the left and the ignorance of trans issues. And I also wanted to just mention that this whole trying to mesh the right and the left together as if we have the same aims, the same end goals, it's a sort of almost like a COINTELPRO. It's a way of infiltrating the left. And I see Tucker Carlson as part of this. I see Vauch, V-A-U-C-H, that radlib who is pushing, the Democratic Party and shitting on, pretending he's a socialist or an anarchist or whatever, and yet putting out all sorts of bullshit about Marx He hasn't got a clue. He's awful, and he's part of it, I feel, a sort of a COINTELPRO, sort of basically leading a whole bunch of young people up the garden path and making them believe that capitalism is A-OK, but pretending like he's a socialist or whatever. I feel like there is these, when public figures, public people who are, say they're leftists or whatever, start going on Tucker Carlson and the sort of shit that Tucker Carlson is putting out when they're not on. What is that? I'm not saying that Glenn Greenwald or whatever, or Max Blumenthal or COINTELPRO or anything. I'm just saying that it's all helping kind of sort of muddy the whole leftist thing, keeping capitalism at the center of things so that people don't think to move away from it properly, and pretending as if, and also the left is not these blue-ticked Democrats. The left, I wish people would stop calling them the left. They're not these people who are trying to keep people in the Democratic Party. I really believe if you are on the left, you have to be anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist. At the very least. You have to be. Anyway, I'll wind it up here. This is actually longer than I thought it was going to be, but I wish that people would give Chelsea Manning a pass if she says some what might seem like naff things to say, because let's remember, she might have said something about, I wish that I'd talked to Ken Klippenstein instead of Julian Assange, right? And that might sound sort of fucked. But at the same time, people need to remember she went to prison and she refused to roll over on Julian Assange, and that's why they put her in prison. They fined her $400,000. So I don't think we should be complaining about Chelsea Manning if she says something kind of a bit off like that, when she literally went to prison again and refused to roll over. They tried to coerce her, and she refused to do that. And they've eventually let her out because she became suicidal. They were just going to keep her there until she rolled over on him and started making false claims about him, and she refused to do it. So what on earth are people doing, giving her a hard time about something that she said in an interview when she's done that? She has more courage in her little finger than all of us put together. Anyway, I just feel really sad that this is the sort of, and this, and Glenn Greenwald doing that article. What a baby. An article exposing all the direct messages between him and her. What a baby. How about we all push back on Glenn Greenwald about his transphobia? Let's do that, shall we? I don't see that. How about we do that? If we say we're on the left, we should be encompassing all groups, all vulnerable groups. And I believe we should be vegan too. This is another thing. The last bastion is people on the left will not look at and will not acknowledge the importance of this end to the exploitation of 1 to 3 trillion land and aquatic animals every year for trivial reasons of mostly palate pleasure. It's destroying sentient beings' lives. Their lives are just as important to them as they are to us, and it's destroying the planet. Let's get a grip on that one too. That needs to be addressed. And I'm not going to stop mentioning it on live streams, even at the point of people thinking that they should block me, because it's inconvenient. It causes cognitive dissonance. I don't care if it makes you uncomfortable. I have nothing to lose in this. I don't collect money from anybody. There's nobody I need to grift to. And I just want some fucking peace on this planet before we all go extinct, which is going to happen anyway. But let's have some peace before that, shall we?